What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright, guys, we're back at it in the Moonlight Butterfly Forest, and what we're going to do this time is a Battle of the Build series. Now, for the most part, I'm pretty sure that you guys are familiar with the character that I'm using. It's just my standard strength build. I've used it in the last, 2 or 3 uploads. So, although I will cover it for some of the guys who may not be familiar, for the most part, this is going to focus on the tank build. Alright, so first and foremost, I'd like to give a shout out to good old Hell Servant 123. He is my opponent, and he's actually doing, I can't even say a good job, I would say an awesome job at using the tank build. Now, why exactly did I decide to make this a battle of the builds? Mainly because I've had a number of guys who, they just have this belief that unless you are fast rolling or using the Darkwood Grain Ring or using the dexterity weapon, that a medium rolling heavy build is just not viable. Right? So I had to do a little homework, and I found the right person to demonstrate that that is not the case. It is not necessarily true. Because as I have said in the past, one difference that I've noticed about dexterity weapons and strength weapons is basically you don't really need to do too much to be successful at dexterity weapons, mainly because they're so fast. You don't really have to judge the distance. You can just basically press the R1 and that's it, right? They're quick, they have a fast recovery speed, so for the most part you're good. Now, strength weapons on the other hand, they swing a little slower, but they are powerful. Now, with regard to the strength weapons, some things to keep in mind. One thing that you need to keep in mind with strength weapons is that you guys really need to pay attention to the distance at which you choose to engage an attack. Right? Because unlike dexterity weapons, it may not be in your best interest to always swing when you're right next to your opponent. Strength weapons in particular, most of them are long. Right, I would say that they're longer than a number of your dexterity weapons, and they are slower. Right, but one good thing about strength weapons is they're very good at dead angling. One example is some of the ultra great swords. Those weapons, although when you're locked on, you can get some wins, but when you're using the dead angle, those things can be a monster. Every single one of them. Right, this includes the Zweihander, the Black Knight Greatsword, the Demon's Great Machete, and the Greatsword. Right. Now, one thing that I have read, I have kind of reviewed some of the comments, and I've heard some guys say, look dude, I tried to give it practice, but I just got killed. I got nailed every single time. Well, one thing that I would suggest for a lot of you guys interested in the strength build, number one, don't try it 1 or 2 days, and then, once you see you may not necessarily be as successful as you would be with dexterity, then you just decide to put it down and give it up. You cannot do that, guys. In order for you to get good with the build, you have to use it for what I would consider to be a reasonable amount of time. Case in point, a lot of you guys didn't just become champs with dexterity weapons. Now, granted, if you're the type of person that like to spam attacks, it's kind of easy to do that. But learning tactics, that's nothing that you learn overnight, right? That's something that takes time to learn. So the same can be said with strength build weapons. They are wonderful if you take the time to learn, that you can play a strength build the same way that you can play a dexterity build. Standards different, the swing speeds are different, a lot of things are different. Right, so let's just kind of go into one of these things. Now, one of the things that made this series of matches particularly difficult for me is Hell Servant is pretty familiar with my play style, right? He knows that, and actually he's, if you got, well, first and foremost, before I kind of get to that, to the extent that you guys are unfamiliar with Hell Servant, he also has a YouTube channel and a chat channel. Oh, I'm sorry, not a chat, a Twitch account, right? And a lot of times when he's on Twitch, he's hosting some type of tournament. Sometimes he does fight clubs. And as a matter of fact, I think either it was last week or week before last, he hosted a cosplay tournament, which was pretty good. And unfortunately I had to work, so I couldn't participate. But from what I hear and from, some of the footage that I've watched myself, it was a pretty good tournament. So what I'll do is, to kind of support good old Hell Servant's channel, I'll go ahead and put a link to his YouTube channel and his Twitch channel in the description box. Hopefully you guys can kind of get a sub and perhaps follow him if you guys want to kind of get some good PvP experience and, kind of participate in a fight club or a tournament whenever he decides to host them. Okay, so back what I was saying. One good thing about good old Hell Servant, he's pretty good at parrying as well. Now, why is this particularly difficult, right, when you're playing against a person who's pretty good at parrying themselves? The thing about that is, because they are good at parrying, in most cases they know, when you're going to attempt to parry and when you won't, right? So because they know this, they don't necessarily play like the average player. Case in point, if you pay attention to a lot of his tactics, right, there's a lot of times when I parry. And as I've said in several videos, I'm not going to give all my secrets, but I'll just give one example of when you roll and, you kind of roll into an attack. One thing, now I'm not saying he's doing it, but I'm just going to give you an example of how careful he is with attacks, which makes this match all the more difficult for me. In most cases, people will kind of roll and then just do a R1. Okay. What Hell Servant will do is, let's just say he rolls, right? And because he's know that, from his own personal experience, that most people roll into an attack. What he'll do is he'll kind of roll, he'll wait a second or two, and then attack, which is great in my personal opinion. Mainly because since he knows that right out of a roll I'm going to parry, he waits a second or two and then attack, which is basically counterattacking my parry attempt. So this is a good thing, mainly because he's basically punishing my parry attempt. So, and that's just one example. Like I said before, I'm not going to go into a lot of the other ones. But because he's pretty good at parrying himself, he's familiar with knowing the time at which I'm going to attempt to parry. And in most of the matches, it backfires on me. And that's why, and a lot of times, I wasn't really able to take advantage of his slow swinging speed of the weapons that he chose. Now, another good thing about his build is that he decided to switch it up with a strength build weapon and a dexterity weapon, that being a spear, because in other words he can compensate for the slow swing speed of the strength build with the fast swing speed of the spears. Right, so I think that's a rather good combination. Now, one thing that I know about some of these heavier builds, a lot of people tend to sleep on the Havel Shield. But for any of you guys who have faced somebody with a Havel Shield or, perhaps a Shield of Artorias, that's a hard thing to deal with, especially when they kind of hold it up. And, I mean, rightfully so. That's what a tank should do, because for the most part, that's what a tank is. A tank is very difficult to penetrate, and it is very strong. Thus the build. So I think had I were to face this build again, I think that I would definitely use either a caster build or a dexterity build. Right now, in 2 matches, he pulls out his barbarian build, which I think is another great build, in which I might kind of create one on my own. I don't know. I mean, he just kind of basically rocking the poise ring and butt naked, right, with the plank shield. So he's definitely doing some kind of jungle guy type of build, which is good. Alright, so another strike in the L column. Alright, so this is one of those invasions that just so happened to arrive while waiting for good old Hell Servant. And I really got to beat down this particular series of matches. But it's all good. Now, so as I was saying, for a lot of you guys that are interested in strength weapons, and actually, I've been kind of experimenting with strength weapons. But one thing I will say with regard to my own experience, I think I should probably invest a couple more weeks into strength weapons. Because one thing that I've found, I've kind of fallen into the trap of finding a weapon that you're pretty good at and you're kind of sticking with it. Right? Because if you guys have noticed, I've used that Black Knight Halberd in a number of videos. And I've actually fallen in love with that weapon. And actually, that was a great parry right there. Wonderful parry. And I'm falling in love with the Black Knight Halberd. But I also want to get good with some of the ultra great swords, you know. The Great Demon Machete, I think that's what it's called, this Y-hander, the Great Sword. Because, you know, I know when I face them, pretty much it's just people spamming the R1, for which, you know, trying to parry an Ultra Great Sword is super easy. But I want to kind of learn to get proficient with some of the dead angle attacks, which is one reason why strength build weapons are especially effective. Once you kind of get an idea as to what dead angling is, for which, based upon my understanding, is one of those situations where you kind of you're attacking unlocked, right? You're not in a locking position and you're attacking. For which the result in a lot of cases is that you can attack through a shield. And you know, I kind of don't really understand how the mechanics work, but that's really what the effect is. So, I mean, let's just kind of go through a good list of dead angling weapons insofar as I'm familiar. Most of the ultra great swords are good at dead angling. The Murakumo is good at dead angling. The Claymore is super good at dead angling. I've heard people say the Halberd, but because the Halberd is kind of like a forward thrusting weapon, I mean, I don't know. It seems to me, in my personal opinion, that most of the weapons with a horizontal attack are a little better, a horizontal or sweeping attack. It seems to me like those weapons would be better at dead angling because some of them not only swing from left to right, and actually my bad right there, I didn't even realize he was grassing. Not only do they swing from left to right, well actually that's the main reason. Because most of them swing from left to right, most of those weapon swings kind of go behind the back. So in some cases, you can kind of do like a complete circle, right? A complete 360 degree attack while using the dead angling method. All right. So, you know, for a lot of you guys who are kind of interested in strength build, but you just say to yourself like, holy crap, I mean, those weapons, they're just too slow and it's a little difficult. Now, granted, you're going to run into these guys who all they'll do is roll BS, which in my personal opinion is nothing less than a backstab fisher, right? And I know some of you guys will make the argument of, well, we're not fishing, we're just punishing. But guess what, dudes? I punished plenty of strength builds and I didn't have to do the continuous roll BS. I hate the roll BS. Mainly because they're kind of, actually you can't even defend against them. You can't defend because in most cases someone is rolling just as your body is attacking, and because your character hasn't had enough time to, you know, recover from its attack, by the time your character goes back to its original position, you've already been BS'd. And actually that was a great parry right there. You guys see that? Fighting a parrier is especially difficult. And another example that I would give with that is, if you ever notice some of the videos, right, where you'll have two parriers dueling each other, you know what you'll see in a lot of cases? You'll see two guys playing super defensively. Super defensively. Case in point, I think there's a video out there, and I'm not really familiar with the title or who it is, but I know I've watched it. I think there's some big shot Xbox guy called 1800 SMD, something like that. And I've heard he's one of those big shots. Some other dude called Elite or something like that. One of those big shots. But I think it's 1800 SMD. Shout out to him. I've never talked to him. I don't even know who he is. But from what I've heard from a lot of these Xbox dudes, he's like the right hand of God with regard to Dark Souls PvP. Right? So to the extent that he is, from my understanding, there's like a video that good old Peeve has with Peeve facing 1800 SMD. And when you watch the match, you'll notice that Peeve is not playing the same way he plays in the forest. Right? He flips like a million times, and he's especially defensive. Good old 1800 does the same thing. Now, this is not to say because they, are trying to become an acrobat, right? They're not into gymnastics. But the thing is, they both know that they need to play especially defensively because any attack can be parried. And I actually do the same thing, right? I do not play players like, case in point, Hell Servant, Short Dude. Short Dude 1, 2, 3. I don't play the same way with him as I do gankers or anybody else, or some of these other guys that I'm pretty familiar with who knows how to parry. I'm super paranoid, super defensive because I know that we basically are looking for the same openings. Now, this is not to say that, I take other players for granted, but because I've had a lot of experience, or I'll say a decent amount of experience playing players like Short Dude and some of these other guys, I know that they're looking for openings, which causes me to be super paranoid, right? And I'm pretty sure some of them at times may feel the same thing with me, like, holy crap, man, I know this guy's looking for an opening, so let me not give him one. So I think that's another reason why good old Hell Servant is being extremely successful with this build. Like I said before, number one, he's good at parrying, so he kind of knows when I'm going to attack, for which gives him good reaction time to counterattack, number one. And number two, he's had enough experience with the strength build to kind of time his attacks, because if you notice, he's kind of playing reactive, right? Because if you just kind of pay attention to when he swings, and a lot of time it's immediately after a miss swing on my part. In most cases. Now, sometimes he does kind of charge at me, but if you notice, right after I miss an attack, he's swinging, right? And when you look at some of the weapons that I'm using, like the halberd, once I miss a swing, he hits me before my body has time to retract to its original position. So he's basically counter attacking most of my attacks, and he's giving me the beat down. Right, so shout out to good old Hell Servant once again. Thanks for the awesome display of PvP. I guess you guys can just go ahead and check out this last defeat. Martyrs Brigade is